I'm Mark Reichle, and we're here at Southmoreland on the Plaza, and we're going to go through the basics of making pie. Today we're going to make a cherry pie with a lattice topping. I'm going to show you some of the very basics of doing a pie crust in your home. It's relatively easy kind of once you get a few things down. So I'm going to start off with the dry ingredients. I use a food processor to kind of mix up my dry ingredients and also to cut the fat, the butter and the shortening into the flour. So 2½ cups of flour. I'm going to add a teaspoon of salt and 2 tablespoons of regular granulated sugar. We're going to give that a quick pulse just to kind of incorporate the ingredients and also kind of aerate them out a little bit. If your recipe calls for sifted ingredients, this is, in my opinion, again, a basic way to kind of sift the ingredients or lighten them up, get them mixed in without having to go through the sifting process. So now we're going to add the fat. We have 12 tablespoons of butter, which is essentially a stick and a half, and I'm just going to cut that into smaller pieces. And why am I cutting it into smaller pieces? Well, if you didn't cut it into smaller pieces, you'd have a big chunk of butter that you're trying to work into the flour. And by the time you got it all worked in, it would really be just a gobby mess, and it avoids doing that. So it kind of makes the process go a little bit quicker. It's important that your butter is chilled or cold. Some folks even take the butter out of the freezer and their shortening out of the freezer. I think that it's sufficient just to take it out of the refrigerator as long as it's really quite firm. And the reason that you want to do that is so that it incorporates into the flour firm and doesn't get gooey on you. So we're going to go ahead and incorporate that right quick. I'm going to do about 8 pulses on the food processor. Okay, and to that I'm going to add 8 tablespoons of shortening. Now the shortening is chilled. I have a brother who believes that the shortening should be frozen as well. I think that you can do it either way. I'm comfortable with it just being cool. And then I'm going to incorporate the shortening. So one of the keys to a light, flaky, kind of delicate pie crust is not to over-process. And if you over-process, that makes it tough. So the more you stir it, if you just turn the food processor on and let it run, then you're going to run into problems. Not that it's not going to turn out fine, it's just that when you go to eat the pie, it's going to be a little bit tougher and probably not as light and flaky as you would like it to be. So I'm going to take this out of the food processor. This is done here, and I'm going to incorporate a little bit of ice water into this by hand. So I've got some ice water that I had in the fridge, and I'm going to just pour 6 tablespoons of ice water in here. Now I'll give you another little tip. I usually fill the tablespoon with the ice water away from the bowl. One day I made this and I was doing it over the bowl and I didn't realize that I was dripping, and it turned out to be too much water, and when there's too much water then it's just it doesn't work as well for you. When you when you're done incorporating the butter into the flour, it should kind of have a grainy texture to it. You'll still see lumps of fat, but it'll also have some flour incorporated into it. So it's not going to be completely smooth. You want it to be a little bit grainy, kind of like gravel. And this recipe makes enough for 2 shells. So in our case it's going to be the top and the bottom of a pie. And these have to chill for at least 30 minutes. Just make sure that you roll it out in as close to a circle as you can. Alright, I do just kind of like a quick little eyeball to make sure it's relatively close in size. And it is. I'm just going to get some little pieces together there. So I'm just going to take this and roll it onto the rolling pin. I'm going to slide my pie plate over, and then I'm going to place this on the plate. Then I'm going to get it situated. I'm going to start off with 3 cups of sugar. To that, I'm going to add a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then our thickening agent is going to be cornstarch. So I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of cornstarch. If you didn't add cornstarch to this, what would happen is that as it cooks, it just turns into kind of a juicy mess. So the problem becomes, because you probably think, hey, it's juice, it's probably good. But the problem becomes when you go to cut it, everything runs all over the place, and you can't get a nice firm cut. So we're going to take this and we're just going to mix this up, just to make sure that that's all that stuff gets incorporated. Alrighty, so we're going to take this and we're going to put it into the reserved cherry juice that has thawed from the frozen cherries. I'm going to whisk this in. Now this takes a little bit of time, but it's an important part of the process. You have to make sure that you cook this until it is thick and bubbly. A spoon of butter. So this kind of gives this whole mixture a little bit of a sheen and adds a little bit of flavor. And we're also going to add a teaspoon of almond extract. But just be careful, when you pull it out of the refrigerator, put the filling in and put it in the oven, sometimes that temperature change is a little bit tough for something that's been cooled completely. If you have a metal pan, it's not as big of an issue, but if you have glass or ceramic pans, just a word of caution for you, okay? So we're going to pour this mixture into prelate crust, do kind of an improvised lattice, so it's really more of a crisscross pattern, and it works just fine for me. I think it still looks beautiful. I have to use a ruler. You can certainly freehand it, but I'm not that good a freehander, so I use a ruler just to kind of make sure my cuts are good. Just continue to crisscross. So I've gotten 2 across, and now I have 2 over the top. I usually work my way from the middle out. I'm going to keep a little bit because it's going to help me with an edge here. So we're going to bake that at about 400 degrees. The oven needs to be preheated.